Welcome back to a short two-part tutorial, and this one we're going to look at routing, and particularly the art of making a good routing great. Now, first episode we're going to look at the base routing I had for the World Cup course that I'm currently working on. You're looking at it here. And the second episode we're going to look at some of the problems that may have arisen and how I went about solving it. First of all, it's worth discussing why is routing particularly important. For me, routing is the framework that underpins your entire course. It allows each individual hole to shine and make sure that they can all be really, really good. And basically making sure that the course as a whole is greater than the sum of its individual parts. It doesn't necessarily make you, and that you're making the most of the plot that you have. For me, there's four key factors when you first go about making up a routing. And the first two are particularly important. The first one is, what are your key features of the plot, and are you using those to the maximum? Now, for this plot, we're looking at some ravines, so it's particularly highlighting those. Are we incorporating those as best we possibly can, be that green sites, tee shots, and are we using those in a variety of different ways? More on that later. So the second one, once you've used those key features, is have you got balance across the course? Now, that could be in terms of paths, in terms of directions, in terms of distances, in terms of when you're coming back to that key feature. It could be in terms of types of hole, in terms of green sites. Are you having green sites that accept a running shot versus an aerial approach? Things like that. Then, for me, is one of cadence. So, how does the round flow? Are we having the same types of holes in quick succession? Are you feeling you've got challenging holes for mixed in with easy ones? And sometimes you may want a really tough finish. Sometimes you may want a slightly tougher middle section. It's really that flow of the round, which is kind of hard to put a word on it, but you'll know where are your best holes as well. Are they spaced out throughout the round, or have you got a real climax? And if that real climax occurs, say 5, 6, 7, how are you making sure that the round doesn't kind of peter out towards 18 and just kind of it becomes anticlimactic on that closing hole? And the final one for me is therefore variety. And a good routing can ensure that you've got variety of holes and that therefore the individual holes don't need to do as much heavy lifting because you've thought about the big picture. Does everything work together and make sense? If you've got a long four, have you got another long four immediately before, and therefore does that dilute the impact? Try to constantly go through your course and work out what's hole 1 looking like and how does that pair with hole 2 and hole 3. And by the time we get to hole 8, have we done the same thing a couple of different times? So what we're going to do in the first one is walk you through the routing that I did for this course initially, and in the second episode we'll look at how we changed it and why. And I think that second video will be the most important one, because for me I can never really commit to a course design until I am 100% satisfied that the routing overall will make this course work and that I've not made any big mistakes that will therefore lead to problems further down the line. So with this one, like I say, we have these ravines. Now, that's going to be the main point of my routing, but I've also divided the course up into a couple of different areas, which is something I tend to like to do. We've got a flatter portion, which I'd say encompasses kind of this part of the plot, because you don't want it to be ravines all the time. That would get overbearing, and you want to really appreciate them when you get back to them. It's like a coastal course. You don't want 18 holes running along the ocean. You want to come back to it at different points. We then have these ravines, and one other aspect of this plot I liked was trying to clump as many greens together as I possibly could in this little area. Now, for me, this is not a must, but I like coming at a routing where you arrive at the same point on the plot in multiple different directions and at different times during the round. So I will look for certain key concepts with how I route a golf course. Two things that I particularly like doing. One is holes that look over one another. So like you'll see with 7 and 8, for example, we can play 7 and we'll see 8 tee shots as well. So that gives you anticipation of the 8th hole as it's going to be. The second one that I like to try to work in as well is these ideas of like little interconnecting triangles. So how can you basically work the player back to a spot that they've already been to before? So if you look at 1 kind of overlooks this area, but then 2 zigzags and 3 comes back. You then have this little loop here, which brings us back to the same point at 8 green where we were with 4. We then come back to that by going 9 and 10. We then go away again and we come back to it on 14 and play out of it on 15. So that little cluster of greens, look at when you're coming back in. You're going 3, then back at 8. Oh, sorry, 3, then 4, then back at 8, back at 10, back at 14. And you get maybe a little visual of it from 1, potentially. Haven't decided quite how I'm going to plant this one yet. So what that can do is really anchor the round so that you're seeing the same portion of the plot and therefore getting a bit more attached to that area and really feeling that you kind of belong, and you're not just seeing 18 different parts of the golf course. You're seeing the same part of the golf course but from different angles, which can make you get that real feeling of place, which is hard to do in a video game. So we're just going to go through hole by hole, and I'll roughly walk you through this and why I think it works in terms of variety. We said we had this upper plateau as well, where it's kind of flatter. Well, here you're doing 1, 2, then you come back on 11, 12, 13, you disappear off it, and then 17 and 18. So it comes up beginning, middle, and end pretty nicely. Looking at the scorecard then, or we'll go through individual holes. You'd start with a par 5, so we're thinking like running approach here. 2, therefore, short par 3, aerial approach works well. 3, big downhill tee shot, and it's going to be a really key hole for this one because the holes when you've got two environments, the ones that transition you between the two, you don't want it to seem too stark. So you want to feel like you are moving between these environments gently. So 3 tee shots going to be key to nail because we're going from this like gentler land movement down to the craziest stuff down at the ravine. Equally, 4 is going to be very important because that takes us down to the ravine side. 5, we have our big feature. I like to try to introduce a big feature early on in a round if I can. So here you're going to get that ravine and you're hitting over it for a heroic carry, cool green site just here. 6, well, we've now got the ravine on the other side, so that balances out 5 quite nicely. 7, we then hit over it, but as a long par 3, it's not really in play, more just for visual impact, so slightly different. 8, it's cutting in front of the green, so maybe we can bank the green just above it. Again, slightly different. We've had left of hole, right of hole, breaking up tee shot, in front of green. I view those as all different ways of using the same feature. So in terms of balance, really happy with that. 9, we're going to cut a fairway sort of through the ravine, so that's using it a different way again. So kind of hitting that variety again once more. 10, we're going to come back, and that's going to be more of a running kind of long ground game approach. 11 plays up another connector hole that takes us back up to this flatter portion. And we haven't really had an uphill hole yet, so that works. 12 is going to play back to the clubhouse, relatively flat par 3. 13 is another one of those transition holes where that approach is going to take us from high ground down to low. 14, we've got a shorter par 4, which would fit nicely with the balance of holes. And that takes us back again to that central location. 15 is a little par 3 that plays out, and again, that gives that little look over 16, which I like. 16, we're bringing back the ravine, so it's the higher point of this one, and you get a real crescendo on 16 with that wild tee shot and second shot. And then 17, you've got a slightly less, slightly more understated par 5. Quite liked the back-to-back 5s. I didn't really always plan on it, but knowing how I wanted to get 18 back to the clubhouse, this made sense. And then 18, just kind of a gentle uphill par 4 to finish. So looking at the scorecard, what are things that I like? Well, we've spread around the par 3s. We've got 5 par 3s, 5 par 5s, so that's immediately giving some variety. Now, the pars and distances on each 9 are quite different, but actually 35 for 3200 is not that distant away from 37 to 3.8. If you think about it this way, like yardage is kind of lie to you. What is easier? A 216 approach shot on a par 3, like look at the yardage that gives you, so adding 216 on. If that's an equivalent par 4, well, given that a drive goes 330, we're looking at 546. Like, consider for 1 here, you're adding on an extra 300 yards. Par times 100 simply doesn't work. It's not a good barometer really for judging the length of a course, because you can twist it by how many par 3s and how many par 5s you've got. Equally, and by the same token, a par 5, no one is going out there and building 700, 800 yard par 5s that frequently. I like that we open and close the front 9 with a par 5. I want to be careful that this 9, like, we're varying the par 4 distances a bit, but I think that's doable. We've got 2 quite short par 3s close together. That will, again, I'm okay with that, but we want to be careful that they don't feel too similar. Then on the back nine, I really like the quirk of having back-to-back par fives near the end. I think that's fun and a little bit different. We'll be careful to make sure they play very differently, but I think the topography they have means that will happen naturally. Back nine definitely a bit longer, so I want to be careful with these two. I'm going to be thinking about, do we need 11 being that long if 10's quite a long hole, things like that, and especially at 8. So looking at those three together, can we mix in a shorter hole maybe? But I'm pretty happy with the distances here. I think this holds up. The par threes are varied in different distances. 2 around the same, but other than that, 216, 170, 196, they're pretty balanced. There's nothing that's leaping out at me yet. I will then check directions of both par threes and fives. Now the par fives, I'll look at like what's the broad direction of the hole. So for 1, it's going southeast. We then get to 9, that's going pretty much northwest, so or north. That's completely different. We then had 13 is the next one. That's going east, so slightly different to 1. That would definitely change how it plays. 16, we're going west, again a different direction to what we've got. And then this one goes kind of north, so similar to 9, but they're different lengths, so I think that works. Par threes, southwest, southeast for 4, so different. Northeast for 7, good, again different. West for 12, again once more different. Southwest for 15. So these two kind of parallel. The distances are very different, so I want to make sure that those will play differently as well. So at this point, I think we've got a pretty solid routing. I think we've brought in mind most of the major things. And that's going to be the end of this first episode. Just kind of looking at what's the key facets of a routing that you want to bear in mind. How do you go about doing this? I knew I wanted to come back to the clubhouse, but I didn't really mind about doing it at 9. So I'm quite happy with the quirk of 12 coming back and then going back off. I feel we've hit the ravine at different points, even if we've got a lower portion of the routing on the front 9 and then kind of an upper on the back 9. I think there's enough character here. So it's certainly a really good starting point. What we're going to look at in the second episode is then how that changes when you start designing holes and the things that you really uncover, and what I think takes a really good routing to being a great one, and how you can really evolve a routing and really commit to that. So thank you for watching. We'll see you again soon.